Hi, it's Debbie. I just want to walk you through the unpacking document just so that you've got a frame of reference and an example to look at since this is new for all of us. Again, keep the comments coming, keep the questions coming. This is a pilot of this process and of the documents that are related to it, and so it's expected that there will be lots of questions and lots of revisions to come as well. So please keep reaching out to me. Okay, first thing, and it's out of screenshot here, and I am working on a Mac to let you know, but if you don't know how to fill in this information up here, at the top of the screen, and not this document, but at the very top of my screen, I have a view page. I click the view page, and once I click view, I scroll down to header footer, and then it opens up my header and footer, and this is where I can put my information in. Then I close my header and footer, and it's saved, and you can change that every week. So you can, and when you use your revised document, you can go ahead and change the week and then save. I would save all of your documents, do a save as you change the document, so that you will have one of these documents for every week. Okay, so let's walk through. When you have more than one area of focus that you're working on for a given week, you're going to have to do there's no more than two areas of focus, so you're going to have two separate documents. I didn't have you do that in the first 2 weeks because we're just getting used to this, but in weeks 3 and 4, you're going to be unpacking recommended practices from two focus areas. You're going to do family and you're going to do interaction. So you're going to have two of these documents to complete on the weeks where there's two. This is an example of just one, and I chose to do family. So if we have the area of focus of family, I'm going to go to the recommended practices document, and I'm going to find this specific recommended practice that I want to work on in my classroom or in my workplace if you're a resource teacher. And I picked F1, and you can see what it is right here. It's building relationships and partnerships with families. So I'm looking at this very broadly because it is looking at families and looking at differences among families, whether they're cultural, linguistic, or socioeconomic. So I'm going to extend that because my students are included in that. They are families. So when I think about instructional objectives, I'm going to think about how am I going to make this relevant for my kiddos, or how can I practice with my kiddos in the classroom as well? So I'm going to be implementing this recommended practice with the families, but I'm also going to see how can I support the kids in the classroom as well in the broadest sense in working with this concept. So one of the things, the way I look at it, is if we are working with our kids in the classroom and we're looking at equity and diversity and inclusion, and we're looking at all of the differences among our kiddos and recognize them and celebrating them, and we want to do that with our families, I'm going to do that in my classroom as well. So in these first early weeks of school, the way I would choose to do that would be maybe through a read aloud, and maybe start getting the kiddos to start recognizing characteristics of characters in a story and then relating them to themselves. It's a big leap. They're going to need some scaffolding. Some will, some won't. Depends on the level. This is just an example. So that might be what my instructional objective is. I'm going to do a read aloud, and then I'm going to have this child name one characteristic about a child in the story or a character in the story. And then I'm also, if I'm thinking about building relationships with families, I want families to be comfortable about what their kiddos are doing when they're with me, and I want them to feel that safety and that trust. So I might have the kiddos create something to bring home to their families. And this, particularly in the early days of school, it would not be my artwork, it would not be my project, it would not be my quote-unquote theme. It would be celebrating the individual child. So I would let them create whatever they wanted to create. And so those would be my instructional objectives. I went to the Virginia Early Learning and Development Standards, and I found which ones I thought were appropriate. And then if I had an IEP, the read aloud. It could be there could be an intention goal in there. There could be an expressive or receptive language goal that I'd be working on as well. So that's how you make those linkages across the instructional objectives, the learning standards, and then the IEP goals. So again, here's just an example. And again, this is a recommended practice that you would recognize as something I'm doing with families, but I'm also making it relevant to the students in my classroom. So I am going to have instructional objectives here as well. So that is how you would do this first part. Then you're going to get into what is it going to look like over the week? What are you specifically going to do as you move forward throughout the week to implement these instructional objectives and this recommended practice? Well, you can already see that I've got kind of two prongs here that I'm looking at. I'm going to be implementing certain strategies with families, and I'm going to be implementing other strategies with my students. So you're going to start to see that as we move through this document, and this is how, again, you would embed these recommended practices into your instruction. So when I think about the instructional area, well, if I'm working with families, I'm going to think about when am I going to see families, or when am I going to be able to work with these families? And in this instance, I'm choosing to do it if I see them in the car rider line when they drop their kiddos off or when they pick them up. I'm going to do it through other communication methods that I use, whether it's a daily or a weekly communication log. I might send them an email. I might call them. I would choose what method of communication that I use in my classroom. For me, I used to use a daily communication log. I would do that. I probably would make a phone call home because it's still the early weeks of school and I want to build those relationships. So you'll see how that plays in when we get into the strategies. And then for the kiddos, I would implement my instructional objectives during Circle. I'm going to do Circle on Tuesday. I'm going to talk about this, and Art Center on Wednesday. Maybe I'm going to do it every day of the week. I don't know, but this is where I'm going to put it. If I plan to do it just on Tuesday, I'm going to write that I'm going to do it on Tuesday. If I plan to do it every day of the week, I'm going to put that I'm going to do it every day of the week. So for these broader recommended practices, it works. It works. If you get into an instruction or an assessment recommended practice, it might be for one of those small little lessons. It might not apply to the broader sense of what you're doing across the week with your kiddos, but here it does. And that's reflected in the instructional area and the timeline. Target audience, families and students. And you will notice that I try to use the term families and not parents, because we have students that are living with their families who may or may not be their parents. So that's just a little aside of why I use the term families and not parents. Okay, so now we're going to get into instructional strategies. What am I going to do specifically to implement this recommended practice this first week? And we're talking about the odd week, as I've referenced before. This is week 3. The odd week is the week I'm introducing the recommended practice. So what am I going to do? For families, I've got very specifics of what I'm going to do to try and build families. I'm going to send something home. I'm going to talk about a strength of their child with them. I'm going to do it on a communication log. I'm going to do it through an email. I'm going to do it through a phone call, at least 3 days, and I'm going to identify 3 different strengths. I'm not going to tell them what I wish they would work on. I'm going to tell them why their kiddo is so great, because I'm working on building that relationship. I'm probably I can build trust with them. I might send them a picture of their child doing something in the classroom where they're smiling and they're happy. It might be a picture of themselves. It might be a picture of them interacting with a peer, particularly if that is of concern with the parent. Of course, I would blur out the other child's face, but I'm going to send them some tangible evidence that their child is happy and doing well in my classroom. Again, that helps to build the trust and build that relationship. Then I'm going to write on their log, and I'm going to call 2 to 3 families during this week. Maybe next week I'm going to call 2 or 3 more families. And then in the future, I would call the rest of the families, or you'll see what my plan is as we move forward. But what am I going to do with families to implement that recommended practice? Now, for what am I going to do with my students? These instructional strategies need to go back to that instructional objective or that I just talked about. I talked about doing a read aloud, and I talked about doing some kind of art expression or art project. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. Very specifically, what am I going to do? I'm going to read 3 or 4 books. I'm going to talk about those books. Here's an example of the question I might ask the kiddos. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do for art. I'm going to put out materials and I'm going to scaffold for them. This is what I'm going to do, and see if this works for me during this first week. Very specific instructional strategies that you're going to use to implement the recommended practice through those objectives, those instructional objectives that you just talked about. What do I want to see? Well, I want to see that I'm building a relationship with my families, and then the outcomes, the expected outcomes, are again related to those instructional objectives that I identified in this box up here. If I look at what the instructional objective is, I can easily write what the outcome is that I expect. So that's what, and I may have, even though I'm looking at this one recommended practice, you can see all kinds of other intentions that I have for selecting this one particular instructional objective about doing a read aloud. I'm looking at receptive and expressive language. I just am getting these kiddos. I want to see what they can do. I want to see what their attention is to a read aloud. I want to see if they have articulation challenges. I can look at cognition. I can do all kinds of different things through this one instructional objective, but in this unpacking document, I'm going to pay particular attention to how do I build relationships. So it doesn't have to be singular in your focus. You can be thinking about these broader areas, and that's how you maximize and make your time with the kiddos more efficient. So that is what we're going to do here. Again, very, very specific strategies that I'm going to use, and I'm going to detail them here. Then I'm going to talk about the anticipated student outcomes. That's all I do for week 3 when I'm introducing the recommended practice. That's it. Then I'm going to go do it for a week. And then at the end of the week, I'm going to think back, did my kiddos meet these anticipated outcomes? Were they able to do what I wanted them to do? How am I going to gather that data? What am I going to do? That information goes here. Actually, I'm sorry, that goes in with the first week that we're doing this. So this would be week 3. Then when I'm thinking about it at the end of the week, I'm thinking what worked, what didn't work. What am I going to do next week? I'm going to stick with this same recommended practice for week 4. But what am I going to do different? What worked? What didn't work? How can I build on the successes that I had during week 3 when I'm trying to embed this again in week 4? How am I going to do that with families? And how am I going to do that with students? So that's what's going to go here in this row. So it's these 2 rows that you're going to do for week 4, the even weeks, when you're revising your recommended practices. And then after this, beyond this week, how am I going to continue to embed this recommended practice? We don't want to embed a recommended practice for 2 weeks and then be done with it. Oh, I already did that. Kind of like checking off SOLs or checking off standards. Oops, already did that. Don't have to do it anymore. That's not how we want to build our practice. We want to focus intentionally on specific recommended practices, but we want to make sure that we go back and revisit them so we truly can embed them in what we do. So that's what this last row is. What are you going to do in the future when these 2 weeks of focus are done? How are you going to continue to embed this recommended practice? So Hopefully this helps. I'm going to post the video. I'm going to post this example, and I'm hoping that this will help you as you complete this document over the next couple of weeks. Again, please understand that I understand this is a learning process. It will take time and it will take trial and error. So I appreciate the grace that you've given me to work through some of these challenges, and I will do the same with you. And please continue to send me questions and concerns. Thanks so much.